Welcome to the Jack Darvra Show. Today we have with us amazing Kirsty Darkins. I read her emails, I read her content all the time. She is an asset manager, a professional in the commercial investment space, and that's where we are focused as well. I've been wanting to bring her to interview for the longest time. I just got busy with a few things, but please help me welcome Kirsty. Pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Jack. Pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Okay. So, from my understanding, you're a chartered surveyor. You don't practice it. I know that, but I wanted to kind of convey this to those who are watching. But you're a chartered commercial surveyor. Now, here is a question which I think most people want the answer to immediately, which is why invest in commercial? Why not in residential?
Commercial is different. So invest in commercial to diversify, invest for less hands-on investment. So most of my clients come to me because they don't want another job. They don't want hands-on property management. Commercial tenants look after everything. So location freedom as well is what my clients like. So you don't have to invest in a cluster in a very specific location in commercial. Can be location independent because the leases are full repairing, insuring, they're long, the tenants look after everything, not much to do as a landlord apart from collect the rent. So you don't need to be really close to the properties that you buy. Pension investment. So a lot of our clients are investing their pensions directly into commercial, which I also do myself. So those are some of the reasons why commercial rather than residential. It's quieter, to be honest. So it's very quiet on the legislation front, which with the level of legislation changing and constantly changing and coming in, making it harder to profit from residential, if that has got you to a point where you're, oh, I either can't do it anymore or I'm not sure that's for me, I don't know how to handle it. Commercial is very quiet. You know, we've still got the 1954 Landlord and Tenant Act that we work to, and it's been
Thank
updated
you for mentioning that. Yes.
twice, since 1954. And so those are the key reasons really why I invest in commercial and also my clients.
Fantastic. I'd like to add something very interesting to this. I share this many times. If you are invested still in residential space, go and read the new tenants reform bill.
Yeah.
And if that doesn't change your mind to going and investing into commercial, then I think nothing ever will, which means the new tenants reform bill really says that even if the tenant stops paying you rent, you're not going to be able to remove them easily. The number of times people approach me, I mean, I spoke with a woman literally a couple of weeks ago. She gave one single room in a HMO to a, even though you may call a HMO commercial, but it's really still residential.
Yeah.
So she gave one room in a HMO to one person. He ended up kicking everyone out. He stopped paying rent himself. He's brought his own family living in the whole HMO, and he hasn't paid rent in 24 months, and the landlord still hasn't been able to remove her.
Wow.
And I
Yeah.
was I was blown away. I was like, and she's in, negative. She can't pay a mortgage. Her credit file is down the drain, really, and she's having all sorts of money problems, right? So I mean, I was looking at this tenants reform bill that you're looking at now. I was expecting this about 5 6 years ago. In fact, I was speaking with someone in 2017. It was that he had 10 BTLs and he was selling them all um, at a time, and he knew that the whole thing is going to change and all of these changes are going to come. And I did pretty much the same thing. I started selling my BTL portfolio, started taking that money and started investing into hotels and self-contained flats for holiday lets and so on. But yeah, just wanted to add that for those who may not be aware or may not know why, it's almost like a comparison between commercial and residential.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, look, there's still good opportunities in residential if you know what you're doing,
Yeah,
but a lot of the strategies that you need to employ to now be able to make a profit are very hands-on. A
yeah,
lot of management, it's a full business, it's creating yourself another job. And if you're up for that, great. And it's great to
great. Yeah,
provide quality homes for people, the rental market's strong,
Yeah.
capital growth is really strong in a lot of areas. It
Yes.
can be a good
Yes.
long-term capital growth strategy.
Yes.
But there's an immense amount of challenge at the moment. And I'm
Yeah.
like you, Jack, in as much as in the private investor community that we live in, and are part of, there is hardly any awareness of what's
Yeah.
possible with commercial investment, or people are afraid of it because they feel they don't know it. Well, it's not a house, I don't understand it, what's that, it's business, how does it work? And yes, it works differently, but for those very reasons, there's a lot less competition, there's a lot more opportunity. The government needs businesses to invest and to grow, for GDP to grow, and therefore they leave the commercial sector be most of the time. We just don't have the
Yeah.
challenge and the change. I'm not saying we don't have any challenges, because we do. The recent
Yeah.
budget presented some challenge, but
Yeah.
not to the level that we're experiencing as residential
That is true. That
landlords.
is true. In fact, I think the biggest differentiator is hands-on and hands-off.
Yeah, I
Because
think so.
if you're investing into commercial and you're giving the lease out, a corporate lease or a registered long-term lease, you literally have no work to do. I mean, we have one of our hotels given on a short lease. When I say short lease, it's still 5 years, but it's not a 7+ years registered lease. And there's literally nothing we do. All we do is collect rent, and the
Yes.
property has to be given back in exactly the same conditions. So I have absolutely zero worries, and I can just sit and enjoy the rent.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, one of the biggest risks in commercial, because that's the question that I often get asked, is
What if I don't get a tenant?
yes, what if I don't get a tenant? What if it's vacant? What if nobody wants it?
Yeah,
Well, just as you do your due diligence for residential investment, that is the key part of your due diligence for a commercial investment. You do the due diligence on demand. You know there's demand. You do your due diligence on your tenant. You know they're strong, they're robust, but you also know that if something happens to their business, you can replace them
that
easily.
is true.
And so,
That is
as long as you've mitigated the risk with your due diligence, and by doing, we do different due diligence, don't we, in commercial? So we're doing due diligence on the tenants' businesses. We're digging in, going, well, who are you? Are you profitable? How long have you been established? And who are the directors? And what other businesses do you own? And can you afford to pay the rent? And that's what we're thinking
the
about.
whole shebang.
Very
Yes,
different,
yes. Yeah.
um, the way that we look at residential tenants, but it's important because it adds the value.
Here is a question for you, Kirsty. I find I've been in property. I was an accidental landlord in 2003. I've been in property business since 2003. One of the major challenges I find, I don't think is just with property alone. It's with all sorts of businesses. But let's say property is majority people that I speak with. They're very hardwired and hard-minded, where they're not even prepared to listen to what someone is sharing. How do you deal with something like this on your end?
Well, I don't, I put the information out there, and I'm here to help if people want to learn what the opportunities are, what the trends are, how the market works in commercial, and work out what could be right for them to invest in. But I'm not going to preach to anybody. People
No,
have
you
to
are.
have, there has to be an opening in their mind of, I'm going to explore, I'm going to consider diversifying. So my question is always, I'll I'll give you enough information for you to decide whether commercial investment is for you or not. Because,
Yep.
there's plenty to go around, uh, and plenty of people who do want to invest in it. And so I'm not going to spend all of my time trying to persuade people to change from
Very something. Yeah.
sectors. I mean, I know I was with a community of HMO investors for the last couple of days
Mhm.
at their annual conference. And they're all at different stages. So some of them have only just started building a HMO portfolio. Some have got very established HMO portfolios and are actually starting to think about what next, and thinking, I don't actually want to add any more, and I don't want to
Yeah.
do any more development, and what else can I do? Or I've got a pension to invest. And they're starting to sell their HMOs, but then they've got all that capital and they're going, well, what should I reinvest in? Because I don't
Exactly.
want to do any more HMOs. So commercial looks good, but I've got no idea how that works. So I've
Yeah.
spent the last couple of days talking to a lot of HMO investors who are seriously considering diversifying into commercial and kind of making that change gradually from one to another. So I like talking to those communities, and I find
yeah,
that once you explain how commercial
yeah,
investment works, there's some light bulbs that go on
yeah,
that people go, I didn't know that. They're
yeah.
like, yeah. Oh, like one guy came up to me and he said, oh, we spoke last year. And I said, yeah. I said, you were looking at buying a multi-tenanted like high street investment. Did you buy it? He said, I did. And I'm kicking myself that I haven't done this before. He said, I did what I normally do. On the day that we completed, I went and met all the tenants and I took them, chocolates and introduced myself. And I haven't heard from them since. And it's 7 months later. And I was like,
That's
yeah,
very interesting.
that's how it works in commercial. He's
That's
like,
how it
but
works.
why didn't somebody tell me this before? He's like, I
Yeah,
could have had a much quieter life. And I was going,
yeah.
I don't know. Like, it's just not
That's
widely
amazing.
understood.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Kirsty. It's interesting because I think the worst investment that I look around, not just as buy to let or whatever, right? But HMOs makes it probably top of the list in the worst one. Because with the new tenants reform bill, the number of people with HMOs that I come across, and they're struggling with their tenants and they're struggling to get rents, and there's properties being broken into and squatters there, and whole thing is a complete disaster. Even though HMOs, the demand for HMOs will increase the more
Yeah.
rents increase, but just because the demand increases does not mean that that's the space to be in.
Well, I think, there are some decent profits to be made in HMOs if you do
Yes.
know what you're doing and if you get it
Yeah.
right. Because,
Yeah.
I also sat down with a couple of people who were asking about, well, what returns are achievable in commercial and they got a couple of HMOs that, post development and into
Yeah.
rental income phase, they're 20% yields. Now,
Yeah.
we don't hit that generally
Yeah.
in commercial. And I said, well, great.
Yeah.
So if you want to carry on though, what does it mean? And she said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, what do you have to do to get to that 20%? So what's the opportunity cost of the time, the
Yeah.
energy, the planning,
Exactly.
the building work, the risk of the development, the management of the property? What's the opportunity cost of that time? And I think a lot of people never really consider the
Yeah.
opportunity cost of getting there via these capital
That is right.
intensive projects and and I'm like, look, we review a property, it's already got tenants, we add the value by working with the tenants and the leases, we don't do any physical development, we're in and out, and then we're on to the next. And
Yeah.
we can do it from anywhere. We don't have to be in a specific
Yeah.
location,
Thank thank you, Kirsty, for sharing that. I think again, you picked the main point, which is most people don't consider the time investment in the
Mm,
game. And if you're losing time doing a deal, that means you're losing other opportunities in the process. Trying to hit that 20-25% yield mark, which I come across a lot of people. In fact, I have been in that space personally myself, where I want to hit 50%, I want to hit 20%, and I end up investing that time into looking for deals that might need some value add, you know, develop at the back, front, side, or whatever, or maybe just do a major refurb, which is what we did in one of our hotels. But there is opportunity cost, like you said, which you end up losing in that time frame. And it's so important to understand that the only value you really have on the table is time.
mm.
And the more you lose that time trying to develop a deal, is you lose other opportunities in the midst of that. So thank you for sharing that.
Well, I think time consciousness of time being the most valuable commodity, it is really not there for a lot of people. It really surprises me. And it's one of my things. Like, I'm all about time freedom. So if people say to me, why do you invest in commercial property? Why do you do what you do? I say, well, look, I left corporate 9 years ago, and now I spend 3 to 4 months of the year out of the country, traveling,
Yeah,
spending time with friends and family, having experiences, experiencing other cultures because I can, because I don't need to be here managing property and doing what, because it manages itself. And I've built a team around me to help with the rest, kind of thing, you know. So it's like, it's got to be your own vision. But for me, time freedom's always been very important. And most people who come towards me will when I dig, because I'll say, what's the reason that you want to invest in commercial property? And of course, the answer top of mind is, you know, financial return. Well, I you know, I want this rental income, or I want to create capital growth, or okay, great. When you've done that, what else? What else is important? You know, and when you really get into it, you're like, so what you're really saying to me is you don't want to be so hands-on. You want more of your time back. You want a return without the, you know, needing to do all the time. And then
Yeah.
well, yeah, actually. And then I say, what are you going to do with that time? And you know, actually, some people don't have an answer because they've never allowed themselves to think about what would life be like if I
If they
had a lot
hadn't.
of my time back. But then others are like, oh, well, so there's a couple I'm talking to at the moment who want to invest in commercial, diversify from resi, because they're going, well, we want to go on an adventure as a family and spend a couple of years abroad and, you know, do all these things. And I want to step back from my consulting because I just really don't love it anymore. And I'm like, fantastic, let's get going. You know, and once you connect with the real reason why, it will drive you to make different decisions. So I
That
like to
is
try
right.
and get under the skin of, okay, yes, understood financial, that we invest to make financial returns, but why else are you investing? What's really underneath why you're investing? And let that drive your decision making as to what you invest in, what the strategy is, and what you don't invest in. And I find too many people just look at what other people are doing, think that's what I've got to do, jump in, go and do it, and then go, oh, this isn't what
This
I
is
wanted. But it's because they didn't start with the end in mind. And so I'm always very conscious with clients and fellow investors of just saying, what's your end goal? Because if you then work backwards and what you're doing now doesn't get you further towards your end goal, then my question is, why are you doing that?
that is
You know,
yeah.
it's kind of,
It's you know, it's amazing, Kirsty. It's so simple. And yet most people don't plan their day, their week, their year, or their life backwards. Dr.
that's
Stephen
right.
Covey,
Yeah.
I think it comes from Dr. Stephen Covey. I loved him. You know, start from the end in mind. And it's just so simple. How many people I know within the network where they've started a journey and they've just created a cage for themselves?
Yeah.
And I always share, like, why are you doing this? Because all you're doing is you're just creating another employment for yourself, and then you can look back 6 months, 12 months, 2 3 years later, and you'd be like, you know, this is not what I wanted. And if I was to just look at all the strategies within the property space, starting right from, you know, development conversions and BRR and the whole shebang that you look at, even rent to rent and buy to let and HMOs, most of them are purely creating cages for you. You're location bound, you have no time freedom unless you become the top 1%er. Let me share that. Because when you become the top 1%er, you would touch a deal and work on it for like a month and then be able to make £1 million plus in profits and walk out of it. That's becoming the 1%er. You can get there, don't get me wrong, but initially it's going to take you at least 3 to 5 years of real hardcore struggle on ground to be able to get to that point. If you do get to that point in the first place, most people don't. So none of these strategies are freedom. Freedom is practically thinking like an investor and then saying, okay, what do I invest in? And commercial at the moment is the best choice. And I can share with you stories and experiences and stats and all sorts of things behind the scene, which will give you which will give, so those listening, which will give you clarity on, really, you shouldn't be looking at other stuff. If you look at developments, for example, Kirsty, I mean, for someone to understand how to develop a site, it's a whole process of shadowing a developer for at least 12 months to understand the technicalities before you can even start. Like, you can't even start developing something. And likewise, yeah, and if you have to shadow someone, unless you have someone in the family, you'll probably end up paying someone £50,000 for you to go and shadow someone.
Well, my strategy, Jack, the only reason I've done some development is because I partnered as a business partner with a builder and project manager who had his own construction company, and that was the only way I was doing it. I was
Yeah,
like, I'm not up for this
yeah,
unless I've got a partner who absolutely has the experience, knows exactly what they're doing with development. And look, I'm a commercial surveyor and investor. I know how to find deals, do due diligence, value them,
yeah,
add value to them. Like I know how to do all of that, but I was like, I actually don't want to learn development myself. So
yeah,
we've done some commercial to commercial developments, we've done some mixed use development, but we always sell off the residential that we create
yeah,
because we don't want
yeah,
residential tenants in our portfolio. We're not set up to manage residential tenants. I mean,
yeah.
I think I sat in a few talks recently at events like landlord shows and things where I've just been, I think my mouth's been wide open because I just go, 175 tick boxes for a residential landlord for a tenancy. Like there's 175 things to be compliant with.
To be ticked off, yes.
I'm just going, oh, how do you even cope with that? Like, hats off. Because I've lived in the commercial world all my life. So,
Yeah,
I've been a commercial surveyor for over 25 years. I've lived in commercial for so long that I've taken for granted the ease of commercial tenancies, longer leases, tenants being responsible for maintenance, compliance, just everything, to be honest. Obviously, if you've got a multi-tenancy, you have a service charge, but the point is the tenants pay for everything. They even pay for your insurance. There is zero cost
yeah.
to a commercial
Yes, they quote
landlord,
the FRI lease, which is basically covering the insurance part as well. Yeah,
Yeah, and I think, a lot of my clients are like, what? The tenants arrange the insurance, but no, the landlord arranges the insurance because it's your building. You need to make sure it's
yeah.
adequately
But
insured. But you
the tenant
recharge
pays it. Yeah,
the cost, and you can even put the cost of a managing agent through the service charge.
through the service charge. Yeah,
So
that's
that's
true.
not your cost
Yeah,
as a landlord. So your gross rent is your net rent
is your
aside
net
from
rent.
the
Yeah,
cost of finance.
that is
Um,
right. Yeah.
you know.
Here's two questions for you. One is, what is the best deal you've done in terms of yield
Oh, that's a good question. Um, what's the best?
without actually doing any work?
Yeah, I think the one of the best deals I did actually was one of the first ones I did myself. When did I do that? 5 years ago. But it's a great example of where people could start if they wanted to start small, for example. Because often I find that when people are diversifying, they don't want to jump in with 500 grand plus when they're testing a
Yeah.
strategy. They're kind of, oh, how do I invest this? So I bought off market through a contact in my network who was selling a property that was 2 shops on the ground floor, vacant offices on the first floor, a 6-space car park at the rear, and a little workshop
Yeah.
basement unit.
Yeah.
So the shops were a hairdresser and optician. They'd been there for 40 years and 25 years respectively. They weren't going anywhere. It was in a thriving high street opposite B&M Bargains, who moved in 2 years previous. So they did all my research for me, in effect. Brands do all the research before they
That is right.
choose a
That is right. Yeah.
location. So if you can see that a brand's moved recently,
There's
oh,
a reason.
tick, like,
Yeah.
good parking, hardly any vacancy in this high street. Spoke to the tenants, they both wanted to renew. I knew that before I bought. And the vacant offices, this was up in Staffordshire. So a small market town, residential capital values are not high. A 1-bed flat is 75 grand capital value. So the cost of value isn't there for a
Yeah.
conversion to a flat. It doesn't work. It might work
It
long
doesn't work.
term as a rental yield, but why bother when it still lets as an office?
Yeah.
So everyone's head automatically goes, oh, I need to convert that into a flat. Like, well, why? So I renewed the leases on the ground floor to new 5-year leases. I didn't change the rent because they were already at market rent. There was not really any uplift. I relet the workshop unit because when I bought it, there was a church group in there. They came out during COVID, and I relet it to an electrical contractor who went on to spend about £15,000 making the unit better, which is often what tenants do as well. I gave him a low rent in return for him doing the work. And then I did a very, very light refurb. So not loads of physical development work, but the office was orange and blue carpet. You know, the toilet was like something out of Train Spotting
Yeah.
because it had been vacant for a little while. And I was going, I just need to change the carpets, repaint, and change that toilet, and then
Yeah.
I'll let it. So that's the only thing that I got someone to do.
Hmm.
And then we relet the office space to a financial services company for 5 years, adding another £5,000 to the rent. So it was a 12% return on purchase. So we bought it for £87,000 cash. It was worth 146 when we bought it.
Hmm.
So we did get a good deal. It was cash flowing 10.5, so that's 12%. And then
Hmm.
we did the lease renewals, we let the vacant office and changed the tenant in the workshop. And the yield after doing that was 19%.
Fantastic.
So the
Fantastic.
rent went up to 16,200 a year.
Hmm.
The value of the property more than doubled to £190,000. And because I couldn't refinance when we were in the pandemic, I flipped it in auction, and took the profit, and
Fantastic.
so I would have held
Right.
it if I could have refinanced, but I had an investor to pay out, and so I was like, it's okay, I'll flip. So I flipped it in auction. It sold first time, over asking, and it was a great little deal. So there's a good example of
Yeah.
taking just a small commercial, renewing some leases, letting some vacant space, more
Yeah.
than doubling the value in doing so.
That's it.
Yeah.
Does a good job. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Here's another question I'm thinking on top of my head is that when you look at, for example, I'm sure you might be aware of the whole planning gain, right, in the residential space, right? When you compare planning gain to a commercial investment, which is where we are. So I am a commercial investor. We also focus on planning gain space in the residential space. We also focus on lease hotels as well as lease blocks or rent-to-rent block space as well, because it's easier to go in and out pretty quickly. When you compare planning gain to commercial investment, I want people to get clarity on this, right? So I've done 2 deals in both spaces, where one was a planning gain. We took an option agreement on a really large detached house, delayed completion 24 months later, agreed price 1.1 million. We applied for planning permission. We got planning permission for 6 flats and 2 semis, 8 units. We ended up selling the option agreement for 1.7 million without actually developing it.
Great.
Our investment was only 20 grand between legals, architects, and planners, giving us a profit of 600 grand. Then, exactly on the other side of the coin, which is commercial investment, we did a deal where I came across this hotel, 20 operational rooms. It came in the market at 350. I went and put a much lower offer. It was rejected. Someone else took it. They couldn't complete it for financial reasons. It came back in the market. I ended up agreeing at 220. We went in, we did a major refurb, adding another 8 rooms to the property, making it now not 29 operational rooms. There's in total 31 rooms in the hotel, but there's 29 operational rooms as we speak to are used as storage. It's valued at $500,000 now. So we invested 65 grand refurbing it, 20 purchase price 285, all in all 290, valued now at £500,000. We ended up leasing it out at £47,000 per annum rental income, all cash deal.
Right.
So when you compare both sides of these investments, the planning gain, you really need a lot more technical knowledge. You just can't do it. I've been doing this for a very long time. I've taken lots of trainings, lots of mentoring, to be able to get to this point of understanding planning gain. But the commercial investment didn't require a lot of technical knowledge.
No.
All it did was it needed me to be good at persuasion skills, negotiating a deal and getting it over the line. So you have both of these. Yeah.
I mean, so I'd say you can do planning gain in commercial as well, but really the
You
equivalent
can, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
is what I've always specialized in for my my whole corporate career, which is asset management.
Asset management.
And I call it paper exercises to make it easier to understand, you know, well, what does asset management mean? What, you just go and manage an asset? How does that add value? Well, paper exercises, that's how it adds value. So so you buy risk, just as you do with a planning gain deal. So you're buying a property on the premise that you're going to get planning permission, which increases the value. So you're taking the risk that you will be able to obtain the planning permission that then creates
There's
that
risk.
value,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Which is a risk. Well, in commercial, what we do is we buy tenanted investments, or part of
Very
it
little
is
risk.
vacant, but we buy tenanted investments that have short leases, because in commercial, all your value is in your lease and your tenant. So the longer the lease and the better your tenant, the higher your capital value. So if
Exactly.
you know that, then what we look for are short leases. So I'm just doing some due diligence today, for example, on 2 properties that I viewed on Monday, where we've got a brand in one of them, TUI, the travel agent, who are holding over. Their lease expired in October. They're just on a monthly periodic tenancy at the moment. So that's very risky because they could walk away at any time. And then the other tenant on the ground floor is a long-established independent blinds company. But when I went to view it, they had a notice in the window, and they've got 6 months left on their lease. So it expires in August this year. And they had a little note in the window saying temporarily closed, please call this number. I'm like, interesting. So you've got 2 very short leases with a load of risk on the ground floor there. Now this one happens to be mixed use with some flats above, which is what our client wants, and they're fully let and there's nothing to do. But all the opportunity to add value is in the commercial. And because of that risk, the seller has just had to reduce the price because he can't sell it for what he wanted to sell it for, because people are going, you want me to take all that risk for a 9% return? I don't think so. You know, so we're getting a higher return from day one because we're taking the risk, but it's not a real risk if you know how to do the due diligence and add value. And you can add 6 figures of value just by renewing those leases or reletting the space. And that's where all the value is. So, you know, we'll go in and we'll have a 10% plus return on purchase. But then when we renew that lease with TUI, because I've already spoken to them and I know they want to stay. So you literally, you know, people go, how do you speak to them? You ring their head office and you say, can I speak to the estates team? And then you find the surveyor who deals with that region and you say, what's your plan for this store? Because I'm looking at buying the property. So it might be your landlord. And then they will tell you what their plan is. It's not a secret.
It's as simple as that. You
just have to ask. And so they've said, yeah, we want to stay. We just haven't got around to putting terms forward and what. So you're like, right, okay. And then the other tenant, you know, I haven't managed to, they haven't answered the number that I've called. The agent hasn't really given an explanation. So we're then looking at what's the demand? How long would it take to relet? You know, so we're going to need to hold this property until we can either renew that lease in August or relet it, but we'll be doing that before it expires. So, you know, by August, that property, so if we buy it for, they want 395, 350 should do it. So we'll be at a 10.5% yield on purchase just by renewing or reletting those 2 commercial units. We're going to end up with a 12.5% rental return, and we're going to add 6 figures of value. So if we buy for 350, we're going to be at 470. And all we've done is 2 paperwork exercises with tenancies. There's nothing else to do. Nothing to do.
That's very interesting.
And there's an industrial one similar, which is 5
Yeah.
industrial units let to 4 tenants, plus 1 is owner occupied. The owner owns the plot, is selling it. And again, you've got 1 tenant holding over, 1 whose lease is due to expire, 2 with longer leases, and then there will be some vacant space to let. That's going, it's asking price 10% because they realise that there's risk built in and they want a cash purchase. So we'll buy that probably at 11%, and then we'll renew the lease of the one that's holding over. We'll renew the lease or relet, depending what they do, and we'll let the vacant space. And again, that will add 6 figures of value and we'll end up at 13% return. Well, we can do that from anywhere. I can do it from being abroad because I'm using local agents to do the work for me. I'm not doing it myself. So I would say that asset management is the comparative in
Yeah,
commercial to planning gain if
yeah,
you're buying resi
yeah.
and creating
Thank you
uplift.
for that. Yeah. It's interesting. I'd like to dig deeper into a couple of other aspects of commercial investment as well. One is the quality of the tenant, and and how does that bit add value to the commercial valuation of an asset.
Okay, I have a whole module on this when I'm teaching people, but in brief, the way to
Brief, yeah,
understand it is that commercial valuation is not a bricks and mortar valuation.
yeah,
It is an investment valuation where we capitalize the rental income stream. So you've got a total amount of rent, and we use an investment yield to capitalize that rent and end up with our capital value. So if you've got 50 grand of rent and your investment yield is 10%, your capital value is 500,000, just to keep the maths easy.
yeah.
But that investment yield is what you need to be educated in, and what comparables inform, and it's essentially a risk profile. So if a tenant is a startup business, for example, they're a lot riskier than an established PLC, like Greg's or
Tenant, yeah.
the NHS or whoever, that's
Starbucks, any
the
of these,
kind
yeah.
of. So we're looking at the risk of a tenant business. How established are they? How profitable are they? How big are they? And then we decide based on that and how long the lease is, what's the appropriate yield to apply. So for instance, for a high street unit, if I've got Greg's in there and they're on a reasonably long lease, then we're at 6 to 7%
Mm-hmm.
to capitalize their rent to get to the
Yep.
value. If I've
Mm-hmm.
got a startup business in there, I'm at 10
Mm-hmm.
to 11% to
Mm-hmm.
capitalize. And because we're capitalizing and it's a multiplier, the higher that investment yield, the lower the value.
Yeah.
And the lower that investment yield, the higher the value. And that tends to explode residential investors' mind, because when they think yield, they think rental yield. So I don't talk about rental yield, I talk about return, because otherwise you've got two yields in commercial and it gets very confusing. So if
Yeah,
I'm
yeah. I know.
saying the word yield, I'm talking about the investment yield we're using to capitalize the rent based on who is the tenant
Yeah.
and how long is the lease and what are the lease terms.
Thank you for that, Kirsty. For those who are watching this, to give you an indication, just by changing the tenant from a startup or a small, business to a PLC, in some cases, you can actually almost
Yes.
double the value of the property by just changing the tenant.
Mm-hmm.
And in many cases, you can actually add at least 50% value, if not 100%, just by changing the tenant. And like Kirsty said, it's just a paper exercise, right? You're physically not doing any work. It's all hands off. Yes, you do have to oversee everything. You have to make sure the numbers work in your favor. Yes, you have to make sure that you got the right tenants in place. All of that is just basic due diligence. But there's not a lot of work when you are working on the commercial investment space in and itself. Thank you for sharing that, Kirsty. Here is another question for you. So, I mean, I come across this all the time through the network when someone is asking for finance, or but I talk about this a lot. I'd like you to share about this, right? Or your experience on this. I had someone approach us for a loan on a retail property. They borrowed, I think it was worth £250,000. They got 50% loan from us. I actually got that loan to them, 125 grand. They bought the property. I think later on they changed something within the shop. They came back. It was valued at £500,000.
Mm-hmm.
They refinanced their property. They pulled all of their money out, and they still have the asset rented out to someone else. It's a
Right.
rinse and repeat model in the commercial space, like it works in the BRR space, which is buy, refurb, refinance. Just that commercial seems to be better numbers, because you can change the tenant and add value without necessarily actually doing a lot of work. Please share your experience on that.
Yeah, I mean it is true. My experience of the market over the last few years, the major challenge that we've had in commercial is interest rates an availability of debt finance, which has been thin for a few years. And so you need multiple exits. So, commercial's great. But I would say this for any investment, to be honest. I would say never only have plan A, because plan A doesn't always come to fruition, So always have plan A, B, C, and then you'll be fine. And so we've had to flip our properties because we are funded by private investors, and we need to repay the loans. And so we can't choose to hold and just wait for the market to recover, because we're at the bottom of the cycle in commercial at the moment, which makes it a great buyer's market, not such a great seller's market. So you've got to be realistic. And the refinance can be a challenge. So what you really want to understand is, what will lenders lend on, because they won't lend on everything. And they don't really like single lets. So multi-let, you'll get a better interest rate, a better loan to value. Which sectors do lenders like lending in? So you've got to build that into your numbers when you do your numbers, because a lot of people don't understand that leverage doesn't work quite the same way in commercial as it does in residential. And often, in order to buy the opportunities that add value, we need to be cash funded on the way in. So yes, the opportunities are there, and absolutely you can double value and some. So I've got a client at the moment who's just bought 5 units, mix of industrial and retail, up near Glasgow, in his pension, 2 units vacant at the front. We knew they were going to let all day long, and within 6 weeks of owning the property, he's already let 1 unit and he's got offers in on the second. And just letting those 2 units, one's going to an established estate agent, so great, that's a great use. They've got a qualified covenant, and he's going to add 40% to his capital value by doing 2 lettings. And the local agent is doing the lettings. He's not doing any work. He's just liaising with the local agent, who's doing all the negotiation and all the back and forth, all the viewings, all the, and the cost of that letting agent is built in to the deal. But 40% uplift for letting 2 units. His rental yield goes from 8% to 12.5%. And that's how easy it can be to add value in commercial. And then in terms of exits, you just got to work with the market like you always do.
Like you always
investor,
do. Sounds good. Here is something I'd like to share with those who may not be familiar with this. Right, if you're investing in commercial, it all depends on the sector of the commercial that you're investing into. If you're investing into a hotel, you can borrow debt leverage up to anywhere between 50 to 65% comfortably. Any more than 65%, you have to have a very good track record and amazing credit file and PGs in place and so on and so forth. If you're investing in for example, a block of flats, holiday-let flats, you can leverage up to 65%, again, pretty comfortably. If you are in a retail space investment, you can leverage easily 50%, in some cases up to 65%. Again, you just need to be aware, because all of this will help you leverage any deal that you might come across. But just be aware that there's no, if I say 50, 65%, don't take that for granted, purely because it depends on the location, it depends on the tenant, it depends on so many factors in that region, as well as your personal factors come into the picture of your experience. If you've been running a commercial business for the past 10 years, that's going to be different from someone who's just come into the picture. So there's loads of factors, but do make sure you check all of this with your local broker, or get in touch with me for that matter. So I'd be able to give you clarity on how much you can debt leverage in the first place, and how much money of your own do you need. Would you like to add anything, Kirsty? Amazing session. I think this is really, really a valuable session.
Yeah, well, I hope so. I think that's all what I would say is, maximum loan to value 65% when you're doing your numbers. So 70% is the top ever that you'll leverage in commercial.
Exactly.
And the other thing to consider in commercial is that the lenders work differently. So they will call the loans in if you breach your threshold. So when values dropped, so let's take industrial property as a great example of what's just happened in the last couple of years. Massive amounts of heat in the market in 2021, 22. All the pension funds turned away from retail because all the shops were shut and went, oh, we need more secure investments. We're piling into industrial. You know, we're ramping up to 30% allocations for industrial property in all the funds, and we're taking 4% yields, and because it's all right because borrowing is, you know, our interest rates are so low, and then interest rates went up and they went, oh, like now we're all over leveraged and and then quickly had to churn a lot of their portfolio and change their allocations. And you know, and it wasn't just the funds, it was anybody that was in that market. So industrial values fell from their height in 2022, and they fell fast at the end of 2023, really fast, and the beginning of 24, 30%. 30% change in value within about 6 months for a lot of industrial. And some people came an absolute cropper with breaching their lending thresholds. You know, they've got, and lenders will call that loan in for commercial. So they don't do that in residential. But in commercial, they will come knocking and go, you either put some more equity in, or you pay the loan now, or we take the property. You know, and they will come knocking. So you have to keep an equity buffer to deal with market changes, because in commercial the market turns really fast sometimes, not always, but it quite often recovers quite fast as well, but it can turn very fast. And so I always say have a 40% equity buffer in your commercial investments so that you can ride the wave no matter what the market
no
is
matter what happens.
doing. You know?
That's a great lesson for me to start with. I can sometimes be on the higher risk appetite side, and that's a good point for me, as well as one of my partner who asked me this question literally a couple of days ago. In fact, a conversation that went for just shy of an hour, and I said, you know, I will make sure that we don't go beyond a certain threshold to get into any trouble with any of the lenders.
It is the best way to sleep, be able to sleep at night, Jack. You know, it's just, look, don't make life hard for yourself. Don't be greedy in terms of what you want to pull out of your investments. Don't over leverage. Just leave yourself nice equity cushion. Also, you're going to get better interest rates if you've got a slightly lower loan to value.
Exactly.
Because commercial interest rates are higher than residential, always will be, always have been. You know, generally 5 to 6% in a lower interest rate market, but right now they've come down. They hit 10% at one point, which was eye-watering. Now I would say they're around 7.5%. Then if you've got a bit of experience, maybe 8%. Depends what you're trying to finance. But you know, they're not attractive still at the moment. You can make it work at a lower loan to value though, because then they will start bringing the interest rate down. So you just got to play with those things if you really want to refinance.
Thank you for this, Kirsty. For those who are watching this, if you would like to understand commercial investment, asset management, Kirsty is someone you really want to go to and speak with. She's on pretty much all commercial social platforms, so do make sure that you follow her. And I would say go and subscribe to her newsletter. There's loads and loads of free guidance she gives in her newsletters. And if you want to take this further, in fact, I would say take it further, purely because, okay, let me share something with everyone, because it's something most people get wrong. If you don't invest in yourself, no one else is going to. Okay? Learn to invest in yourself, guys. The only reason I have been able to, I came as an immigrant, Kirsty, right? 25 years ago. I came with £300 in my pocket. For those who are watching this, the only reason I've been able to get to this point in my life where I don't have to work a day in my life, I still do because I love it and enjoy it. I don't have to work a day in my life is because I've learned to invest money in myself. Pay for trainings, pay for mentoring. Do your due diligence. Don't just go to some random person who's charging you £1,000 a day for some shitty training. Don't do that. There are loads of people out there who are providing decent trainings at cost-effective prices. Go and do them. Do your due diligence on the person. Kirsty is someone I've known for quite some time, trustable. Make sure you get those trainings. Make sure you get guidance from her, because that's how you grow. You're not going to become that top 5%er, top 3%er, top 1%er, you know, property portfolio owner unless you learn from other people. Like I said, if you don't invest in yourself, no one else. Why would someone else? Why would someone else?
Yeah, it's a very good question, Jack, and I
You know,
totally agree. So I've spent six figures on
yeah,
investing in myself
exactly.
over the last 6 years,
Yeah,
with mentors, with coaches, and I
yeah,
regularly say that I wouldn't still be in business without my business coach, because you know what? It gets tough sometimes. There's
yeah.
always challenges. There's always, you've always got, and it's like half the battle is mindset. It
It
really
is.
is.
It is. It
It's
is
about
no
having
doubt.
people who can hold you, who can lift you up, who can help you work through challenges, who can, as well as education and accountability. And I find also for my clients, it's confidence.
Yeah,
Confidence is the big thing. It's, oh, this is all a bit new and scary. I'm doing something for the first time. I've learned what I need to do, but implementing it feels really scary.
it is.
And a lot of the time, what a mentor brings is the confidence to help you get over that obstacle, and then
Yeah,
you can grow from there. And
yeah,
I love watching people fly.
yeah,
Once I've got a lady at the moment who's in my mentoring group, and I'm just going, oh, this is brilliant. And she's like, oh, I've agreed another deal. Oh God, right. I need to find some more funding. She's like, I've got 4 illegals. I've got a massive deal pipeline. I'm just going to keep going. And I'm going,
yeah,
you know,
yeah. That is
it's
true.
great. It's great watching
Yeah,
people. But yeah, I totally agree.
yeah,
You do need to invest
yeah,
in yourself, and just identify, look, what am I not strong at? What do I need more knowledge in? How do I
yeah,
keep myself safe as well? So
yeah,
I always see myself when
yeah,
I'm mentoring or providing a service as security.
yeah.
I'm keeping you safe. I'm stopping you making really costly mistakes. And it's
Mistakes. Yeah,
not just about the money, it's about the time again. So
yeah,
how long will it take you to be successful by yourself?
yeah.
Compared to how long will it take you to be successful if you've got someone behind you
Exactly.
giving you all the tips and tricks
It,
and like,
it blows my mind when I speak with people who, they've been struggling for 20 years.
yeah,
They've been struggling for 10 years. And I'm like, all you have to do is say, I want to go and get mentoring from someone that inspires me, and that's all it takes. In fact, in some cases, I can share, like I've had times when someone has approached me and said, well, I can't pay for trainings, I can't pay for mentoring. Okay, fine. You go and work for someone for free. Go
yeah.
and work for someone and shadow them, but they don't pay you for working for them. And in that way, you can get mentoring, you can shadow them, you can learn the game. Brilliant. 3 months later, you would know most of what needs to be done, and then you can go and do it yourself. You don't always have to pay for mentoring. You don't always have to pay for trainings. There's always creative ways. But again, it's I was sharing this with literally some of our members, right? I wanted to get to a point where we don't charge people for trainings, we don't charge people for mentoring. How can I create that system? It took me nearly 7 years, Kirsty, to get to a point where we don't charge for trainings, we don't charge for mentoring anymore. We will literally get involved in doing deals alongside people. As long as you're committed, we can do deals together, and then we can make profits from it. You don't have to pay for trainings and mentoring. That's exactly how we build the franchise model, where we will generate the leads for you. We will even bring money for the right deal, and you don't have to pay for trainings and mentoring.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are different ways of doing everything. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
in commercial investment, we do say that you can't invest in commercial property unless you've got some capital. So
Exactly.
it's
Yeah.
kind of it's not really a question when people come to us, because they have to have the capital in order to
Exactly.
invest
Yeah.
in the first place. So, it usually their questions aren't, well, how much is it? They just kind of go, well, how can you help me? And then we'll
Yeah.
say, well, this is how we do it.
You're
But also
structured. Yeah.
because you're investing,
Yeah.
and the result of working with us is you'll have a property investment, it's an investment rather than a cost. And I think people
Exactly. Yeah.
want to look at it. It's a mindset shift, but people go, oh, isn't that just a sales semantic? You know, it's an investment, not a cost. Well, no, because if the result is that you end up with a cash flowing commercial property that you've added a lot of value to, and you pull that value back out, and the rental income has covered the cost of your investment in mentoring or whatever service it is that you need, it's an investment. It's not a, and I see my
Not a
own,
cost. Yeah.
I see what I've paid out for mentoring and coaching as an investment, because I wouldn't be where I am today. I wouldn't have
Yeah.
property portfolio that I have. I wouldn't have the business that I have. I wouldn't be able to take 3 to 4 months of the year off and go
Exactly.
wherever I like with whoever I like, which was my goal when I left corporate. Was that is what I want to create. I need to say no to everything that doesn't take me towards that. And that's been my barometer.
Yeah.
I've slipped sometimes, but that's why you need coaches and mentors, because
Exactly, to hold you for that. Yeah. Yeah.
you kind of
True.
go, didn't you say that this is what you wanted to do? Because if you go for that investment, that's not going to take
That's
you
not
there,
going to, yeah, exactly.
and
Yeah.
my mentees will kind of go, I knew you were going to say that. But, well, if you knew I was going to say it, why did you bring it? Oh, I don't know. It just came up and it feels comfortable. Well, do you know what? Get comfortable with feeling uncomfortable, because it's the
Yeah.
fastest way to grow.
That is true. That is true. Stick to your lane. I always say stick to your lane. If you stick to your lane, you'll be fine. It's just that most people, it's shiny penny syndrome as well.
Yeah. The next new
Fantastic.
thing.
Thank you, Kirsty. Absolutely amazing session. I would say again, go check Kirsty Darkins, her website. You'll see a link to her website below or somewhere around this video. Go and check it out. Make sure you get guidance from her, and that will help you achieve your full potential, either personally as well as professionally. Have an absolutely amazing day. Make sure you subscribe to this channel wherever you're watching this from. You like, comment, subscribe, and share with your loved ones.